Lewis Hamilton breaks his silence against Mercedes and Toto Wolff. Stay until the end to find out what could be the end of Mercedes in Formula One. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. For what felt like an eternity, Lewis Hamilton kept everything inside. The outside world saw a calm, smiling figure, charming in the paddock, gracious in front of the cameras, and diplomatic in every word he offered. His social media was curated with intention, motivational quotes, nostalgic throwbacks, and the occasional cryptic caption that only a few could begin to decipher. But none of it revealed the storm that had been building beneath the surface, the emotional burden of a season that had tested not just his skills behind the wheel, but his trust, his loyalty, and his belief in the very institution that helped shape his legacy. For months, the questions kept coming. Reporters, fans, analysts. Everyone wanted to know what was happening behind the scenes at Mercedes. And each time he responded with the same tired script: "We're working together, we're trying new things, we believe in the process." But privately, Hamilton was counting down. Every missed opportunity, every cryptic radio message, every post-race conversation that ended in vague explanations and deflected accountability became fuel. He wasn't just hurt, he was preparing. That preparation culminated in a private meeting, held discreetly in Monte Carlo just weeks after the season's final race. It wasn't meant to be a confrontation. Those who attended were told it would be an informal wrap-up, a time for honest reflection and planning for the future. Instead, it became something entirely different. According to multiple people who were present, the atmosphere in the room changed the moment Hamilton entered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bring notes. He simply sat down, looked each person in the eye, Toto Wolff included, and began to speak. And once he started, he didn't stop. For nearly 3 uninterrupted hours, Hamilton delivered a monologue that would ripple through every corridor of the Mercedes headquarters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. He began not with accusations, but with memories, reminders of victories, sacrifices, and the bond that once felt unbreakable. Then, methodically, almost surgically, he dismantled that illusion. He spoke of meetings that had gradually shortened in duration and depth. He mentioned technical briefings where his voice, once central, had become peripheral. He detailed how strategic decisions, once collaborative, were now made in closed rooms where he was no longer welcome. And then he named the pattern for what it was: deliberate marginalization. Not a sudden betrayal, but a slow, calculated erosion of influence and trust. The silence in the room was heavy. Wolff reportedly tried to interject at one point, but Hamilton calmly raised a hand. "Let me finish," he said. And he did, laying out a timeline that began months before the first race of the 2023 season. He pointed to subtle changes, shifts in engineering priorities, unexplained alterations in the structure of the race strategy team, and a noticeable change in the tone of internal communications. But it wasn't just about vibes. Hamilton came with receipts. He outlined specific clauses in his contract that, according to him, had been repeatedly breached. Clauses designed to protect his competitive parity with George Russell. Clauses that ensured equal access to data, telemetry, simulations, development feedback, everything a top-tier driver needed to extract the maximum from his machine. And yet, starting from the 5th race of the season, anomalies began to appear. Data packages that used to arrive at 9 a.m. sharp on Fridays were suddenly delayed. When they did arrive, they were incomplete. Pending verification, some reports said. Others had entire sectors missing, blacked out without explanation. At first, he thought it was a technical glitch. Then he assumed it was just growing pains from internal restructuring. But then came the interviews, Russell's post-race comments casually referencing adjustments made based on simulation findings Hamilton had never seen. The picture became painfully clear. The information wasn't delayed. It was withheld. And worse, it was selectively distributed. Russell wasn't just driving better, he was being equipped better. Hamilton said he confronted the engineers directly. The answers were vague, avoidant, unsatisfying. One even told him to speak to Toto. And when he did, he received platitudes: "We're figuring it out, everyone gets the same tools, there's no favoritism here." But those reassurances now rang hollow. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. He went further, accusing the team of quietly pivoting its development philosophy around Russell's driving style, a subtle but crucial shift. Brake balance, downforce allocation, corner entry profiles, all gradually adjusted in a way that didn't complement Hamilton's preferences. When he raised concerns, the team cited budget constraints and standardization protocols. But somehow, those constraints never seemed to apply when Russell needed something altered. In one case, Hamilton said he waited 3 races for a new front wing specification, only to find out Russell had tested the prototype 2 weeks earlier in a closed session with no media access and limited internal reporting. Throughout his speech, Hamilton didn't once lose his composure. That's what made it so powerful. There were no emotional outbursts, no personal insults, just an undeniable accumulation of facts and patterns. He wasn't there to destroy relationships. He was there to reclaim his voice. And perhaps more importantly, to deliver a warning. He reminded the room that loyalty is not a one-way street. That while he had given everything, his time, his image, his talent, he expected more than just public praise and social media tributes. He expected honesty. And in his view, that had been lost. Those who were there say Toto Wolff remained mostly quiet. A few others tried to explain, some attempted to downplay certain claims, but no one could offer a comprehensive rebuttal. Because Hamilton had anticipated every counter-argument. He didn't just bring emotion, he brought timelines, emails, comparative data, internal memos, and a memory sharper than ever. It wasn't about proving his worth. It was about documenting a shift in culture, a shift that left him behind while pretending to carry him forward. What happens next remains unclear. Hamilton left the room with the same quiet intensity he entered with. No final statements. No ultimatums. Just a lingering silence that spoke louder than anything said aloud. But those present will not forget the moment. Because for the first time in a long time, Lewis Hamilton didn't just drive the narrative, he owned it. And as he walked out into the Monte Carlo dusk, one thing was clear, he wasn't done talking. He had simply begun. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. He leaned forward, the tension in the room thickening as he moved into what he characterized as the most insidious form of betrayal, one that not only compromised his competitive integrity but, in his words, deliberately engineered failure under the mask of technical necessity. As he recounted the manipulation of his car's engine deployment modes, the gravity of the allegations became clear. According to Hamilton, during a critical series of qualifying sessions, 5 in the 2023 season and an additional 3 in early 2024, the configuration of his hybrid energy deployment was systematically altered during his final push laps. These were moments where lap time gains could mean the difference between pole position and the second row, and yet he alleged that during precisely those crucial moments, the car inexplicably underperformed. He explained that the official justification he was given at the time, thermal management constraints, seemed plausible on the surface. But as the irregularities accumulated and the pattern solidified, Hamilton's doubts grew. He became increasingly convinced that something was being manipulated beyond his knowledge, and that these actions were not the result of random glitches or cautious engineering decisions. What truly ignited his suspicion was the discovery of encrypted command sequences sent through a control channel that, by design, excluded his race engineer from the loop. This was not a system error, it was a deliberate architecture meant to operate in the shadows. He later confirmed these suspicions when a disillusioned engineer from within the team, someone he described as a silent ally, passed him internal diagnostics and back-end logs that confirmed there had been no overheating issues, no flagged anomalies, and no safety thresholds breached. The thermal narrative was a fabrication. With a mix of frustration and emotional exhaustion, Hamilton told those gathered, "Imagine competing in Formula One, in qualifying, knowing you're giving your all, driving to the edge of adhesion, risking everything through every corner, and then being told later that your car wasn't even configured to deliver full power. That someone somewhere flipped a switch that cut your legs out from under you. That's not racing. That's sabotage wrapped in protocol." As murmurs spread through the audience, he paused for a moment before delving into the most deeply personal revelation of the day, a private exchange with Toto Wolff that occurred away from cameras, microphones, or press intrusion, in the quiet aftermath of the Monaco Grand Prix. Hamilton described how he confronted Wolff directly about a growing discrepancy between his simulator work and the setups he was being given for race weekends. He spoke of how he would spend hours in the simulator identifying the optimal configuration, only to find that his car behaved in ways fundamentally misaligned with what had been tested. The Monaco setup, in particular, felt neutered, a car incapable of delivering on turn-in precision, with balance issues that hadn't been present in simulation. When Hamilton voiced these concerns, he didn't receive reassurance or a commitment to investigate. Instead, he claimed that Wolff leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and delivered a comment that chilled him to the core. "Maybe it's time we admit the sport's changed, and so have you." That line struck Hamilton not as a reflection, but as a warning, a euphemism that his value within the team was being reconsidered. According to him, the message was clear: his place in Mercedes was no longer untouchable. That evening, Hamilton sent a formal request for a complete audit of his car's setup allocations versus simulation parameters across the last 5 race weekends. He was assured the data would be compiled and made available shortly. Days passed, then weeks. He followed up repeatedly, each time receiving vague responses. Eventually, the matter was left to fade, absorbed into the team's bureaucratic machinery. The data, he revealed, was never released. Just when the room thought it had heard the most damning part, Hamilton pivoted to an area outside the racetrack entirely, an arena where he had always exercised cautious control, his image. With visible agitation, he recounted how Mercedes' marketing division had, according to him, completely disregarded long-standing agreements about image rights and ethical boundaries. He pulled up images, slides showing brand campaigns in markets he had never approved, his likeness emblazoned across fuel promotions in Southeast Asia and North Africa, complete with slogans and endorsements he never gave. Some of these ads, he said, tapping one image with visible disgust, had me promoting fuels that come from suppliers I've publicly spoken out against. More troubling, however, was the revelation that artificial intelligence had been used to recreate his voice, his exact tone, cadence, and vocabulary, to record a scripted endorsement for what was labeled a next-generation combustion solution. This digital voiceover, synthesized and launched without his approval, mimicked him saying things he never authorized. To some, it might have sounded authentic. But to Hamilton, it was a clear line crossed. His very identity had been digitized and weaponized for profit without consent. "They didn't just interfere with my races," he said in a low, deliberate voice. "They manufactured a version of me that I didn't authorize. They stole my voice, my face, my message. Everything I spent years building, they repurposed to serve agendas I don't align with." He clarified that this wasn't just about brand integrity, it was about autonomy. About being turned into a commercial puppet while still under contract. About how the erosion of trust within a team wasn't limited to pit wall strategy or technical decisions, but extended all the way into the boardrooms and digital marketing labs of a billion-dollar brand. His closing remarks were almost whispered, yet no less cutting. "You give your life to a team. You fight through crashes, losses, politics, and pressure. And then one day, you realize the fight wasn't fair. That while you were racing with every ounce of your soul, someone behind the curtain was scripting a different version of you. And not for victory, but for control." After the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix, a series of events unfolded behind the scenes at Mercedes that now appear to have marked the irreversible breakdown of a once formidable partnership. It wasn't just the race result or the performance issues, it was what happened afterward in the sanctuary of the hospitality unit that set the tone for what Lewis Hamilton would later describe as the moment he detached emotionally and professionally from the team he had led to so many championships. According to Hamilton, he stormed into the team area, holding a tablet in his hand, visibly shaking with fury. He placed it firmly, some sources say slammed it, on the table directly in front of team principal Toto Wolff. On the screen was damning evidence. Detailed data logs, garage footage, and internal communications showing that George Russell had been fitted with a newly upgraded rear wing that had originally been developed for Hamilton's car. Hamilton was allegedly never informed of the switch. What made it more painful was not just the apparent deception, but Wolff's reaction, or rather, the lack thereof. Hamilton claimed Wolff didn't argue, didn't attempt to defend the decision. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, locked eyes with Lewis, and said with eerie calmness, "We need to prepare for the future. You're not it anymore." That single sentence, according to Lewis, felt like the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't said in anger. It was said as a decision already made. From that moment, Hamilton later admitted, he ceased to view Mercedes as his team. Publicly, he would continue wearing the badge, driving the car, fulfilling the obligations. But mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he was already gone. But that confrontation, seismic as it was, turned out to be merely the opening act in what Hamilton would later describe as a slow, methodical disintegration of trust between him and the organization he once called home. The months that followed revealed, in his words, a level of manipulation and disregard I never thought possible. During the final stretch of the 2024 season, Hamilton claimed that his car became a testing ground, not for performance improvements, but for experimental and unvetted parts aimed at preparing for the 2025 regulations. These parts, he alleged, had bypassed the usual engineering protocols, including the formal sign-off from the technical committee and proper stress testing. The Mexico Grand Prix was a turning point. Hamilton recalled feeling a strange rhythmic vibration under his seat during the high-speed sections, something that no telemetry could fully explain and which the engineers seemed unwilling to even acknowledge. He insisted on a mechanical audit post-race. The result? The part in question, a section of the floor underneath the car, was labeled as misplaced. No analysis. No report. No accountability. It was only later, through sources inside the team, that Hamilton learned the truth. The component was a prototype floor developed to test drag behavior under 2025's anticipated aero regulations. And it had been installed without his approval, without a single conversation. They didn't see me as a driver anymore, he said. I was a data point. A lab rat. Not a 7-time world champion, just someone to extract numbers from. What began as an internal fracture turned into a global firestorm. The moment fragments of his private debrief began to leak, the story caught on like wildfire across social media, message boards, and major news outlets. Fans started doing what the media hadn't dared to, combing through race footage, digging into race strategies, analyzing team radio messages with the fervor of forensic investigators. Reddit exploded with detailed breakdowns. One user even cross-referenced every undercut strategy over 2 seasons, meticulously charting how often Russell benefited from optimal pit timing compared to Hamilton. The data was startling. Patterns emerged. There were races where Hamilton's tire degradation was broadcasted to the world in real time, while Russell's issues were mysteriously absent. Team orders often came couched in vague language, but subtle shifts in tone and phrasing betrayed a deeper truth. Onboard audio from several Grands Prix revealed moments where Hamilton questioned strategy calls and received clipped robotic replies, while Russell was engaged in open, collaborative dialogue about pace, tire life, and overtaking opportunities. The favoritism wasn't just suspected, it was, in the eyes of many fans, undeniable. And with every new clip unearthed, every statistic reanalyzed, the narrative hardened. Mercedes had already chosen their future, and Lewis Hamilton wasn't in it. As this wave of scrutiny gained momentum, Mercedes responded with the cold detachment of a corporation in damage control. Their official statement was brief, emotionless, and strategically vague. They expressed gratitude for Hamilton's years of service and dismissed his allegations in broad terms, asserting that they dispute any claims that compromise the integrity of the team. There was no mention of the unauthorized parts, no clarification on the leaked rear wing data, no specific denial of the race strategy inconsistencies. It was as if they hoped the storm would pass if they simply stood still long enough. Meanwhile, Toto Wolff remained publicly silent. When he was approached by journalists at a high-profile charity gala in Vienna, he declined to answer any direct questions about the fallout. His only comment, made to a single outlet in passing, was, "Lewis is entitled to his version of events. We know ours." No elaboration. No defense. Just a line in the sand that made the divide even starker. But for Hamilton, this wasn't just about hurt feelings or professional betrayal. It was about legacy. "You give everything to a team for over a decade," he said during a private conversation with close friends that later surfaced in the press. "You sacrifice your life for them, and when they decide you're no longer useful, they don't even have the decency to tell you directly. They do it in silence. In strategy meetings you're not invited to. In parts you're not told about. In priorities that shift without warning." What stung the most wasn't the mechanical decisions, it was the emotional erosion. The sense that, after everything, he had become invisible inside a structure he once helped build. And the world, watching from the outside, could now see it too. Every clipped radio message, every strategic mishap, every awkward team photo, they all carried new weight. Even within the paddock, murmurs began to spread. Rival teams took notice. Former teammates offered cryptic messages of support on social media. Industry insiders whispered that Hamilton's exit from Mercedes would go down as one of the most stunning and poorly handled transitions in F1 history. But for Hamilton, it was more than just a bad breakup. It was a revelation about how fleeting loyalty can be in a world driven by data, PR optics, and long-term planning. His final races weren't just about competing, they were about surviving an environment that had already turned the page. George Russell hasn't made any official statement yet, and his silence is becoming increasingly difficult to defend. He's always been known for his media polish, his calm demeanor, his measured words in front of the camera. But behind the scenes, according to those who work closely with him, he's been visibly rattled. Shaken is the word one close associate used. Another said he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't realize the full extent, one source confirmed. But in the tightly controlled world of Formula One, where whispers can echo louder than shouts, that's not good enough. Not anymore. One mechanic, speaking on condition of anonymity, recalled hearing Russell mutter something under his breath during a quiet moment in the garage, something that now feels almost like a confession. If I knew they were doing that to him, I would have said something. Whether that's true or not is up for debate. What's not up for debate is that he said nothing, and now the weight of that silence is pressing down like a storm cloud over the Brackley paddock. And then there's Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton, arguably the greatest Formula One driver of all time, the man who helped turn Mercedes into a dynasty, isn't whispering anymore. He's not hinting. He's not speaking in riddles. He's speaking with precision, with purpose, and with a level of calm fury that seems far more dangerous than any public meltdown. When he took the stage to make his first major address since his shocking departure from Mercedes, there was a gravity in the room that no one could ignore. What began as a thank you to fans quickly morphed into something far more powerful. A reckoning. A warning. A final chapter written not in ink, but in fire. By the time Hamilton reached the end of his speech, there was no more room for ambiguity. He made it clear he wasn't just walking away, he was exposing something. And he came prepared. I have receipts, he said flatly. Not with drama. Not with flair. Just with certainty. Emails. Internal documents. Voice memos. Recorded phone calls. The tools of someone who knew this moment might one day come. He made it clear he wasn't keeping these things as a weapon of revenge. He wasn't seeking retribution. He was seeking truth. And he was offering that truth to the next generation, the young drivers watching from the sidelines, wide-eyed and naive, who believe talent and loyalty will protect them. They built a legend with me, Hamilton said, the words deliberate, every syllable like a blade. Then they tried to erase it, brick by brick. But history doesn't forget. And neither will I. The ripple effects have already started. Quiet phone calls. Private meetings. Whispers in boardrooms. Sponsors, once deeply embedded with the Mercedes brand, are reaching out to Ferrari in ways they hadn't before. Not with bluster. Not with banners. With cautious curiosity. What does it mean to stand beside Hamilton now? What kind of loyalty does that represent? What kind of future? Inside Ferrari's Maranello headquarters, reactions have been mixed, part excitement, part disbelief. According to a senior executive, the internal mood shifted the moment Hamilton's revelations began circulating. If even half of what he said is true, the executive said, then we're not just welcoming a 7-time world champion. We're welcoming someone who's about to change everything. And yet, even as the media spins its stories and fans divide themselves into camps, the deeper truth remains chillingly simple. Hamilton didn't just end a contract. He broke free from something much larger. From a system. From a culture. From years of being simultaneously elevated and diminished, cheered and undermined. And he's not looking back. Not with nostalgia. Not with regret. He's burning the bridge, slowly and methodically, making sure the flames are visible to anyone who might ever think of crossing that same path without understanding the cost. Every word he speaks now carries weight, because it's not just about him anymore. It's about legacy. About dignity. About refusing to be rewritten by those who no longer benefit from your presence. The silence from Mercedes has only amplified the noise. No official denials. No counterstatements. Just a strategic retreat into corporate ambiguity, waiting for the storm to pass. But the storm isn't passing. It's growing. And Hamilton is feeding it, not with vengeance, but with clarity. With facts. With the kind of emotional precision that doesn't seek to destroy, but to illuminate. He isn't screaming into the void. He's handing people a flashlight. And what they're seeing is unsettling. George Russell, once seen as Hamilton's heir apparent, is now caught in the middle of a story much larger than himself. Whether he was complicit, naive, or just willfully blind may never be fully known. But the question will hang over his head every time he gets into that car, every time he stands on that podium, every time a journalist asks him a question he can't answer without betraying someone, either the man who paved the way, or the team that now defines his career. And as for Mercedes, the brand once synonymous with domination and unity, it now stands on shifting ground. Internally, fractures are being exposed. Departures are being hastened. The whispers are turning into phone calls. The foundation, once unshakable, is showing cracks that no amount of PR can patch. Because when a man like Lewis Hamilton decides to speak, people listen. Not because he's perfect, but because he's paid the price. And because he's still here. Still fighting. Still refusing to be erased. What comes next is unknown. But one thing is certain, Hamilton is no longer just a driver. He's a force. A symbol. And every step he takes now isn't just toward a new team, a new chapter, or even a new championship. It's toward something bigger, something permanent. A legacy no longer defined by trophies, but by truth. By resistance. By the refusal to stay silent when silence became complicity.